Everybody joining me on the podcast today. I'm joined by Blake Lovell. We're going to be recapping and talking about these 7 SEC teams that are going to the Sweet 16. 7 of the 14 that made it are going to the Sweet 16. And joining me to do so, friend of the show, Blake Lovell. Check them out, Southeastern 16. They're knocking out videos and content left and right with all these teams in the SEC that are in the NCAA Tournament. And Blake, I appreciate you coming on the show. I know it's been it's kind of, I guess, a breath of, a little bit of a break here before we get to through Thursday with the Sweet 16. I appreciate you taking time to come on the show.
Yeah, thanks always for having me, Phillip. Yeah, it's a couple days break, and then we know it cranks up again with how many SEC teams in record-setting 7 teams in the Sweet 16. So yeah, plenty of more basketball hopefully to be played.
So if I saw the schedule correctly, so Thursday there will be 3 of the games involving SEC, and then you'll have 4 more on Friday night. So
Well,
buckle
you've
up,
got
get your
the other three, Phillip, because remember we've got 2 teams playing each other. So you've got
that's
three on
that's it.
Thursday, 3 on Friday. I know I keep forgetting that too. I'm like, all right, we got to preview 7 games. I'm like, no, we don't. We got to preview 6, and of course it's Tennessee, Kentucky, right? That probably only be seconds either Auburn, Alabama, or Kentucky, Arkansas if that was the pairing. But Tennessee, Kentucky, in and of itself, look out. So
Yeah. It slipped my mind there that we do have 2 teams playing each other. So if you guys 6 videos, but 7 teams are playing. And just over 17s. Are there any of these 17s that will surprise you? I think a lot of people may say Ole Miss has got to be surprised, but I know for you guys as listened to y'all last week when y'all was kind of previewing the thing. I know for you, Ole Miss was 10 years like kind of look out for. But is there one of these 17s that is a surprise that they made it to this week 16?
well, and that's the thing is like you said, I think most people will point to Ole Miss. Obviously, Arkansas being a 10 seed will surprise some people, but you again mentioned it like we've kind of been talking up these 2 spots for Ole Miss and Arkansas, and when we came into the tournament, we're like, it's all about matchups. We say it every year. It's about who do you draw, and our thought on Ole Miss was they have a lot of teams that play a very similar style. And that's why we like the matchup against Iowa State. We like the potential matchup against Michigan State. Now, I'll be honest, I probably did what a lot of other people did. I completely overreacted to North Carolina in the first 4 game when they came out and just took it to San Diego State. But all year we've kind of talked about Ole Miss as being like an Elite Eight type team because they have the experience in the backcourt. They're one of the older teams. I think they are the oldest team left in the tournament, and just the way they defend. So I think that combination, I don't think we should be that surprised that they're still here. And with Arkansas, I mean, you heard us say it how many times probably. I said, whoever wins Kansas, Arkansas, I just think that they match up so well with St. John's because of St. John's offensive inefficiencies sometimes, and that's exactly how we saw it play out. With Arkansas defensively, they've been fantastic this year. Even though the offense, was a big topic of discussion early in the season. Now you're talking about an Arkansas team that's all the way almost back to full strength. You had them in a matchup against a good defensive team, a great defensive team, but a team that just had so many stretches you feel like where they just couldn't score. Felt like a good matchup. Then everybody else, I mean, right? We expected everybody else to be there. And so, yeah, I don't know that they're really. It's wild to say for a team that or a conference that got 7 into the Sweet 16, but I don't think there have been like any just huge surprises to this point.
Yeah, with Arkansas getting Flan back, and that's the thing too. This team was what they're 0-5 in SEC play with him playing, and then
Mm-hmm.
now look at it now in the tournament, and just how dangerous could this team get if they get Thero back?
Yeah, no, they absolutely could, and I mean that's what we just talked about. Kind of all right, they're almost back to full health, but now they may be all the way back, and I think that is kind of a dangerous thing when you look at Arkansas because remember too coming into the season, like I was the high man on Arkansas. I always every year I'm always the guy that overrates Arkansas. It seems like I see the roster and I'm like talent wise that was the top 3 team in the SEC this season. Now the problem was from day one they had injury issues. Then it became about can the offense get over the hump? And then, of course, Flan gets injured. I think he's out for the season. Thero gets injured. And it's just, it's been one thing after another. But talent wise, it's always been there. And that's why I think, for all the issues we've had with Cal over the past however many years in terms of his offensive approach, his defense this year, I think, is the one thing that just has not been talked about enough. Like they have gotten after it defensively. And I think that's been the difference. And, now you're kind of in a scenario where it's not just having everybody all the way back, but Jonas Adu's playing his best basketball this season. Trevor Brazil's playing his best basketball. Look at the freshmen. Look how many big plays those guys have made in tournament play. Davis is playing great basketball. Wagner's playing great basketball. You just keep going down the line, and I think it is one of those things where everything's clicking at the right time. And to me, Texas Tech's a very high octane offensive team, top five in the country. So the defense is going to be the name of the game. But there are a couple areas I think with Arkansas that they can sort of exploit what A&M or what Texas Tech does offensively, and I do think that gives them a chance to keep marching on here.
So now we talked about surprise, disappointments. And we look at a lot of these teams. I think a lot of teams are where you probably would expect to lose early. Would you have
Mm.
to say probably Texas A&M if you had to pick a disappointment? That would be the team.
Yeah, I think it's probably choose between A&M and Missouri just because I think if you start with Missouri, I mean, it was a tough matchup with Drake. I honestly probably did not give Drake enough credit for being able to dictate how that game was going to play out. I just thought it's one where, kind of like we saw with Alabama St. Mary's, where you're like, okay, eventually the team that likes to play fast is going to speed the game up, and it's really hard to slow it down at that point. But Missouri could never get that going. It played right into Drake's hands. So I think Missouri has to be disappointing, not just because they lost in the first round, but remember, this couple, probably a month ago, we're talking about Missouri as, 3-4 seed type range because they were clicking on all cylinders. They were doing well, but then they just hit their worst basketball of the season was played down the stretch. And I just think that has to be disappointing for Missouri fans to see the season in that way where they just could not get enough stops defensively and things just sort of, again, did not go their way the way it had for the majority of the season. With A&M, I think it's disappointing for the reason that not just being the higher seed, but I thought it was the best matchup for them. Matchup wise, I thought Michigan was a really good statistical matchup. And I think that was something where that has to be disappointing. And it goes back to the same stuff we've always talked about. And you probably heard me talk about it after this game on Saturday, whatever it was. I'm like, at some point, A&M's just got to value shooting. And until they do, I think it's just going to always be something where they just have not shot the ball well ever under Buzz Williams, it seems like, right? And I think until they maybe can combine that a little bit with the physical style of play, I brought up the stat. They've not ever in Buzz Williams' 6 seasons shot better than 32% from three. And it's just one of those things where, like, eventually that catches up to you because you're not going to be able to just shut everybody down. So I do think it's pretty disappointing to see the season in that way.
So let's talk about the Auburn Tigers. I think that's always a fun conversation, especially the way the season ended. Losing 3 out of 4.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people maybe outside the SEC or maybe just outside our casual college basketball fans, oh, wow, they're struggling good in the year. I thought the A&M game, they were set up for a loss. It's a Tuesday night
Mm-hmm.
on the road. You just clinched the SEC. I mean, who knows how long they celebrated that and Tennessee beating Alabama to get the outright title. And then you lose to Alabama at the buzzer. Ole Miss, okay, that was a struggle win to a degree. It was, not pretty throughout the whole game. And then, of course, you lose to Tennessee. Then you get to Alabama State. You say, okay, they talked about all this stuff. They're going to flip the switch. They're going to get back to how they were. And then it was not a great performance against Alabama State. I mean, Alabama State got within 1 point there toward the end of the first half. Alabama goes on that Auburn goes on that 9-0 run. And then after the game, you hear Dylan Cardwell, you hear Stephen Pearl. They were not happy, and I was kind of surprised, Blake. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't warranted. They called out. I mean, I know Stephen Pearl did. He called out, Janile Broome and Chad Baker Mazzaro. Just what were your thoughts about Auburn after that Alabama State game going into the matchup with Creighton?
Yeah, I mean, that to me was going to tell us everything. Like, if they were going to come out and sort of respond in a big way, I mean, that again may kind of tell us what we should expect from them moving forward because they did that. And I think the biggest part of this game was sort of Creighton at one point. I mean, I think Creighton was up. Was it up 2 at the half? I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just thinking, all right, all the pressure's on you as the number one overall seed. You just came off of, like you said, a bad game against Alabama State. You've got coaches and players that are publicly unhappy with the way things are going. And now you're playing a Creighton team that's playing their best basketball of the season, and you're down 2 at halftime. And momentum is swinging. I mean, Creighton hit, seemed like their first 500 shots from 3.
Yeah.
And it's just like everything's sort of going against you at that point. Like all the things people have been saying about Auburn, okay, maybe they're overrated, all this other stuff that's been out there. Everybody's, kind of had that debate or whatever. I think the way they responded after that to me is like one of those where do we look back 2 weeks from now when they're either playing for the national championship or in the Final Four, whatever, and just say that was what it took right there. For whatever reason, it got to that point that it did, but it just took the way they responded in the Creighton game to get them back to being the old Auburn. That's what they look like. They look like the old Auburn in the second half of that game, especially with the way they finished it. And so it's not something you ever expect to see for the top overall seed in the tournament, where you have all this stuff after your game against the number 16 seed. But that's what we got with this team. And after the struggles to finish the regular season, I don't think it maybe should be that surprising. But again, when you go back to it, I did the average. The 5 teams that Auburn's lost to this season, their average ranking in KenPom is 6th. And it's just like they are a team that I know has been frustrating at times, whether it's just, a team that plays with high emotion or it's just been, not playing well in certain stretches of some of these games. They're still 30-5. They're still a team that I think has all the pieces you need to win the national championship. And so we'll see if the way they responded, winning that Creighton game, is this kind of that reset they needed, carrying them into, again, a very interesting matchup against Michigan on Friday.
Yes, I'll trade you one 7-footer for 2 7-footers to deal with.
Right.
Next up with Michigan, and Chad Beckman got hurt in the game, but just he really took his game to another step in that second half. Of course, he get injured, and man, just Tahad Pettiford struggled against Tennessee, 0 for 8 in the game, but how he's played in these 2 tournament games, especially in the second half there against Creighton, just you can't even tell he's a freshman. I mean, he has no fear. I think he actually plays better away from Auburn this year than he does at home. But what's been your takeaway from Tahad Pettiford?
Yeah, I feel like we brought up that stat a couple times this season where it's like, look what he did at Duke. Look at the game against Houston. Iowa State, like North Carolina, all those games like early in the season where he just played really well. The Purdue game, that wasn't a home game. Georgia is one that stands out. I think that's been his best game of the season scoring wise. And then again, coming off of his second one against Creighton. And it's like you said, this guy is, Max, of course, calls him Mr. Big Shot and all that. And he's a freshman. Like he's a freshman that steps up and makes all these plays. And I think that's one of the most impressive things just about what he's been able to be this season. I remember the stuff going back earlier before the season started. You're getting all those practice clips and everything. And you're like, all right, what can I really overreact to when it comes to practice and see all these things? But you could just see with this guy, Auburn would share like a 30-second clip on Twitter or something. And I'm just sitting there saying, all right, do I overreact to this? Do I overreact? Of course I'm going to overreact. Like, he's just the speed and the agility that he played with the ball in his hands. Like, you're just thinking, all right, that's that next great Bruce Pearl point guard. And that's what he's been. And I think, again, he's not shied away from the moment in any of these spots. And to me, if he gets the ball in his hands with a big shot opportunity against Michigan, he's probably going to knock it down because he just welcomes these opportunities. So he's been fantastic and definitely one of the reasons why they are where they are.
And, of course, going in the matchup with Michigan, the 2 7-footers, Golden and Wolf. Of course, there's also going to be the storyline, the Trey Donaldson side of this, too, as well, with Auburn. Of course, he's playing for Michigan, former Auburn guard. But, Janai Broome, so we haven't really seen a great offensive performance in these first 2 games. 14 points against Alabama State, 8 points against Creighton. And, look, it was a tough matchup for him going up against the 7-footer there at Creighton. But going up in this matchup, they feel like this is a game where they're going to need more from him offensively than they've had the first 2 games.
Yeah, agreed. And like you said, I think anytime you have, over there on the other side, you're looking at Big Vlad, you're looking at Danny Wolf. I mean, these are 2 7-footers, and it's just one of those where I think the way that they can impact the game, makes it significant, not just from, looking at scoring-wise for Auburn, but I think shot selection. Because if you think about it, like those are things too. If we picked on Auburn for a couple things this season, I think at times the shot selection is something where you try to force something here or there. And we say that, right? They're still just a tremendous offensive team. But we've always said Bruce Pearl will give, his guards the freedom to run their offense, do what they want. And then, certainly if you get the ball to Broome, he's going to have, kind of open play there to do what he wants because he's that good. And so I think how they sort of attack Michigan is going to be very important because just like Auburn, that's a top 15 defensive team. I think, Michigan top 15 in the country too in their 2-point field goal defense, which makes sense because you've got a lot of guys in there, that can impact plays. So I think it is going to be important. Shot selection more than anything, maybe in this game, because Michigan's the kind of team that I think when you look at it overall, they can be very efficient themselves offensively. And, to me, it's like Auburn's got to take good shots. They got to force a few turnovers. If they can do that, I think they're going to be fine. But it does kind of start, I think, with the game of the paint here.
And then the team going in, the hot team everybody wanted to pick, it wasn't Auburn. It really wasn't Duke. It's the Florida Gators. And, hey, just the way they run through the SEC tournament, who could blame anybody for just, hey, let's just pencil Florida as the national champion? They got a real test on Sunday against UConn. And looking at that bracket, I mean, that looked like probably their toughest matchup going in because, now Maryland, and we talked about Texas Tech, Arkansas winner. So they have, I wouldn't say an easy road, but you can see the path to the Final Four for the Florida Gators. But just the way they responded to UConn. I mean, UConn's not the same team they were the last 2 years, but still fighting back, finding a way to win in that game. Just what was your biggest takeaway from the Florida Gators? Just finding a way to fight back and win that game, when it kind of had been easy the last few games.
Yeah, just like with Auburn, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, again, we're looking back and being like, that was the game they just had to get by. Like, they just had to find a way to get through that game, and then everything started to open up from there. Because we see that in the tournament a lot, right? Where you see that initial opening weekend, everybody's trying to avoid the upset, and then things reset and calm down for several days. And then maybe it's the teams that have kind of proven it all year long have a chance to get back in that same scenario after regrouping, looking at a few things they did well, didn't do well, and then making adjustments. And I think for Florida, I said going into this, you probably heard me say this 100 times too, where I'm like, I think UConn was going to be the toughest game they'd play on the road to the Final Four. And I still believe that with the way the bracket has unfolded, because it wasn't just, the nature of, hey, you're playing UConn as the number 8 seed, right? That's the defending back-to-back national champion that has no pressure on them. Meanwhile, you're the one that has all the pressure on you, and you're playing them, again, the defending back-to-back national champion, and they're not the ones with the pressure on them at all. And it just felt like, kind of a no-lose situation for UConn. They win, here they go again. They lose, well, they were the 8 seed. And what a run they had, right? So I thought for Florida, it was going to take everything to beat them, and it did take everything to beat them. I just thought it was a rough matchup from that standpoint. And of course, again, some of those things you got to clean up. The one thing I've said about Florida, if there's anything I can pick on them for, they're just not a great free throw shooting team, and that worries me a little bit when they get in these close games. And it could have beat. I mean, we could literally be looking back right now and saying, man, Florida lost by a point to UConn, and they missed 12 free throws. That's the reason right there. And, luckily that didn't happen, but still, that does, when they get in some close games, which I would expect that to be the case here over, the next week or whatever, they're going to have to make more of those, and they've got to be able to get that opportunity to do so. But that's where I think for Florida, this matchup against Maryland, to me, Maryland basically is a 5, they play 5 guys. And when I think about the offensive rebounding for Florida, and I think about how many potential extra opportunities they're going to have at the rim, we know what happens when we see offensive rebounds. There's a lot of physicality, guys foul, all that kind of stuff. If Florida can just rebound the ball on the offensive glass the way they have all season, if you get Maryland in foul trouble, that's it. And so I think it's pretty simple for Florida in terms of like the game plan here, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if we look back and say that was the toughest game they played if they were to get to San Antonio.
And we've seen Walter Clayton play great all year, but what he did in the clutch on Sunday, too, hitting the big three to go up 62-61 with about 2:54, and then hit the other three to go up 70-64. These were not like wide open threes either. I mean, he had pressure. He had defenders in his face and still been able to knock down those shots. And, in March, you see it all the time, guard play, guard play, guard play. That is what puts you over the top most of the time. And just having a guy that you now know you've seen against UConn in the big pressure moments that can knock down those kind of shots, before that's got to give you a lot of confidence, as you said, when you go into these close games as we go further into March.
Yeah, I mean, he's about as calm, cool, and collected as it gets. Like, he's just very nonchalant, I feel like, with him. He never gets overly emotional. Like, he just kind of has a, just a very cerebral approach, it feels like. And he's so talented, and he can kind of score, as you said, in a variety of ways. And I think anytime you have a guy like that leading the way, you've got a chance to win a national championship. So
All right, so real quickly, just on Alabama, Robert Morris gave them everything they wanted and then some. And really, it felt like Robert Morris is big. They gave Alabama problems. They out rebounded Alabama in the game, and then turn around and play St. Mary's, and that was an interesting matchup because I was talking to I have a lot of family members that are Alabama fans, Blake. So I was telling, look, this is an interesting game. If Alabama gets to play their game, I don't think St. Mary's has a shot. But if St. Mary's can kind of dictate the pace, we'll see what happens. Alabama pretty much dictate the pace in this one. Just what stuck out to you most with Alabama, and now you go in that BYU matchup. We know they can put some points up, and just the way Alabama plays, the up and down style, it leads other teams having opportunities. I feel like we're going to get an entertaining game in the Sweet 16 between Alabama and BYU. But what's kind of like your overall thoughts on Alabama so far?
yeah, no, they've not played great, I don't think. And I just again, like you said, the rebounding stuff is the one of the worrisome items. I feel like I think they gave up 16 to Robert Morris, 15 to St. Mary's, which St. Mary's got a lot of size. Not that Robert Morris didn't have some, but not to the level of St. Mary's by any means. So that was a little bit interesting, I thought, just the way those two games played out. But the thing is, we always say, no matter how poorly it seems like Alabama plays, whether it's rebounding, defense, whatever, they're just always going to get their points. And I think that's the thing that makes it so hard to beat them. Is like we just said, hey, we don't know if they played that great. They scored 90 in their game one and they scored 80 in game two. And it's like, that's Alabama. Like they just, they don't have to be perfect because they can be so good offensively that the way they play is still going to get them to a number that a lot of teams aren't really going to reach. And the difference, though, you've heard me be all optimistic about these first couple games, but this one, I'll be honest, I'm not to that level. I think BYU is the kind of team that can beat Alabama, especially if Alabama plays the way it has, in the first week of this tournament. Because again, I said it, there's not a lot of teams that can get to that mark that Alabama gets to. BYU can absolutely get there, especially when you look at just the way they're playing right now. I did the Bart Torvik advanced metrics and all this other stuff. Like if you filter it back to February 16th, so basically a month and a week, BYU's playing like the number 4 team in the country right now. They've been the 4th best in the country since mid-February. And so that's the team you're playing as a 6 seed. And I just think it's a dangerous game for Alabama because, again, I don't think Alabama's defensive improvement has gotten enough credit this year. They've been a lot better, which I think you can certainly credit multiple guys for that, whether it's Chris Youngblood or just the big guys and Big Cliff and Mo D and all those guys. But they're going to have to be nearly flawless, I feel like, to slow down BYU and stop them because they've been that good and they shoot the three so well. And you know what, Phillip? I mean, that's been the difference this year with Alabama, right? They're shooting it good, but they've not just been invincible from three. They've had some of those games where they don't make a lot of threes or don't shoot a high percentage. So I think this will be potentially the most entertaining game of the Sweet 16 because you're going to get points from both of these teams. But I can't say I'm just overly thrilled with the BYU matchup for Alabama.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Now, I will say this. The only reason why I would not want BYU versus Duke, their jerseys just look too much alike. I was watching a game against Wisconsin, and I was watching with my girlfriend, and I said, they look like Duke. They do not need to wear the black jerseys. And so we'll have to, they will look very similar with Duke and BYU if they meet up in the Elite Eight. Tennessee, Kentucky, we mentioned that kind of the top of our conversation, 2 SEC teams that are playing each other. And you look at Tennessee's been such a good team all year, but their Achilles heel has been the Kentucky Wildcats. Jazz Lanier has been playing great, 29 in the first game, 20, in the next game. Of course, I saw Kentucky beat the Troy Trojans in the first round, and they played well against Illinois. And they've got guys that can score too. What is it about Kentucky that you've seen this year that gives Tennessee trouble?
Well, I think Kentucky is just the kind of team that when they play like they did against Illinois, I thought that was one of their better games of the season. And you can say, well, they only won by 9 or whatever, but I thought they just completely controlled that game pretty much for the most part. And they didn't just do it with their offense, they did it with their defense. And I think that's the thing that we probably don't talk about enough with Kentucky. If you're going to beat Tennessee, you need to do what? You need to force some of those sort of vintage Tennessee doesn't score for 4+ minute type stretches. And I think the way Kentucky is defending right now, they absolutely can do that. And then it becomes all right. That puts all the pressure on Tennessee defensively, which the Vols are usually fine with because they're a top 3 defensive team in the country. But I mean, Kentucky has beaten Tennessee with Lamont Butler. They've beaten them without Lamont Butler, and so Kentucky's going to be the team mentally that comes into this game thinking, you know what, we've done this a couple times. We know how to beat Tennessee, and it's probably going to start with our defense, but we feel confident enough offensively that we can find a way to make this work, especially knowing that we get Lamont Butler. And remember, I don't know if we talked about it, Phillip, but I brought up the stat. I mean, how wild is it that Kentucky is 24 of 48 from three? They went 12 of 24 in each of the 2 games against Tennessee from three. Tennessee is the number 3 team in the country at defending the three. Kentucky is shooting 24 of 48 this year for 50% against the Vols. Now, I think if you look at it, you could say, is that really going to happen for a third time? Are they going to shoot it that well? The statistic or the probability of that happening seems low. And so it is such a fascinating matchup with these 2 teams. But I'll tell you, I think Kentucky's playing their best basketball of the season right now, especially on the defensive end of the floor. I think Tennessee is playing some of their best basketball of the season right now. So this is all you could want from a Sweet 16 matchup involving 2 SEC teams.
Yeah, maybe this is not the only matchup we'll get with some SEC teams in the tournament. So it's going to be fun. Well, I can't wait for Sweet 16. It's going to be fun Thursday night and then Friday night. Then, of course, the Elite Eight this weekend. So, Blake, before I let you go, I've gone a little bit over what I said, but do you have time for a non-basketball question?
Uh-oh. I'm ready. You know I'm always ready for these.
You probably know the topic I'm about to ask you
Oh, yeah.
about.
Oh, yeah.
So, me and you are mutual. We're wrestling fans. We're WWE fans. I just want to ask you one question off of last Monday. Are we buying John Cena as a heel?
You know what I need from John? I need him to give me a little bit different delivery. I need him to really. He sounded like the way he said it sounded the same as he always sounds. I feel like the words were different, but I think the sound was the same. I need him to get a little bit more something, Phillip. I don't know what it is, but I need the verbal approach to change a little bit. I need to get back a little more ruthless. Like, you know what? Let's talk more just doing what he did at the Elimination Chamber. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm kind of saying. I think we need to get a little bit more of the John Cena. You remember how he was when he first became champion, like after he beat
Yeah.
JBL? He was still kind of like a little bit of the flavor of the Dr. Thugonomics. That
Mm-hmm.
John Cena. We're
Yeah.
not supposed to be in a PG era anymore with the WWE, with Netflix, and all that stuff. Obviously, with the language that Cody Rhodes used at Elimination Chamber, they can get away with some stuff. So let's get a little bit more of a ruthless aggression, John Cena.
There you go. That's
That's
what
what
we
they
need.
need.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you got classic babyface Cody Rhodes. We need the villain John Cena to show up. So I had to ask you that before I let you go. You probably figured I was going to ask you a wrestling question at some
Mm-hmm.
point, but hey, I saved it to the very end. But anyway, Blake, appreciate you coming on the show as always, talking all things SEC hoops. Again, we're looking forward to Sweet 16 Lead 8. I just want to tell everybody go to Southeastern 16 and check Blake out. Him, Chris, Max, they got you covered. But Blake, why don't you tell the folks why they should be checking out the Southeast 16 and where they can follow you as well?
Yeah, check us out, Southeastern 16. Yeah, we'll have game previews up for all the SEC matchups coming up this week in the Sweet 16. Of course, we'll have our live reaction as well to all the games. And yeah, it should be another, again, fun, exciting action on the court this week. And yeah, you can also find everything else on Twitter at the Blake Lovell.
All right, everybody, go check out Blake. Go check out Southeast 16 once again. Blake, appreciate the time, and I look forward to when we get to this again.
Always enjoy it, Philip. Thanks for having me.